This is the bar chart that changed my life. This chart shows the tonnages of the various white grape varieties harvested in California in 2008. As you can see, Chardonnay is far and away the most popular white wine grape grown in California. When I first saw this chart, as well as the broken out data behind the Chardonnay total, I instantly realized just how messed up the California wine industry is. Now, this is a conclusion that isn't obvious to everyone because in order to really appreciate the problem, you need to have a baseline knowledge of viticulture. And so let's go there first. It had been noticed well before recorded history that grapes from different areas produced wines of different qualities. This environmental factor is why, even to this day, wines are labeled with the geographic region where the grapes came from. Primary among the factors that cause differences in different growing regions is heat, and more specifically heat over a period of time. For a grapevine to do its primary task of ripening fruit, the temperature needs to be over 50 degrees, and the hotter it gets, the more of this work can be done. When you add up this heat over the course of a growing season, you start to get an indication of how much work you can ask a vine to do in a given place. This method of analyzing a growing climate is called heat summation. Let's look at the monthly temperatures for Burgundy, the region in France where Chardonnay was developed. Now let's look at Carneros, the southern part of Napa and Sonoma counties. As you can see, even though the peak temperatures for the season were quite similar, Napa's Carneros district has a longer growing season due to its lower latitude. This results in a significantly greater amount of total heat during the growing season, enough so that the same variety makes two completely different wines in these two regions. But that is only a moderate example of the disconnect between Old and New World Chardonnay. I consider regions like Napa Carneros to be borderline acceptable for Chardonnay. When you consider that 2/3 of all Chardonnay grown in California comes from hot places like the San Joaquin Valley, I think we have legitimate cause for concern. Now, all time spent over 50 degrees during daylight will contribute towards the work that the grapevine can do to accumulate sugars and ripen its fruit. And the more heat, the faster it can do this. But the accumulation of sugar is not the only thing happening. At the same time, acids, which start off being pretty high in the berries, are being consumed by the vine. And this happens faster with increased heat as well. In addition to the accumulation of sugar and the softening of acids, there is a secondary type of ripening happening which is difficult to categorize. In the wine business, we call this physiological ripening, and it includes everything from the browning of the berry's seeds to the softening of the skin and the accumulation of a wide variety of compounds that comprise the flavors that are typical of that variety. So here's where it gets tricky. The rate at which a grape will gain this secondary physiological ripeness is only indirectly related to temperature. Every grape needs a different amount of hang time to become physiologically ripe. And the key to really high quality grape growing is to make it so that the grape becomes physiologically ripe at the same time that it becomes ripe with respect to sugar and acid. Now, the only way to do this is to pick the right variety for the climate that you're going to plant in. The different grape varieties that we have today can be seen as the evolutionary adaptation of the grapevine to the climate in which it's being grown. But in this case, it's not the process of natural selection that is driving evolution. It's man selecting those vines which make the better wines over the span of generations to the point where they get the wines that do the best in those climatic conditions and make the best wines for that area. A good example of this is Cabernet Sauvignon, which is a cross between Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. And this is a man-made hybridization that resulted in a variety that does very well in Bordeaux. So now you too can look at that chart from earlier and see what I saw. This cold climate Chardonnay, which is evolved in really cold Burgundy, is planted everywhere in California, and we don't even think twice about it. In fact, we plant Cabernet Sauvignon right next to Chardonnay at almost every top-end winery and think that is just fine. Now, there are a lot of people who praise Chardonnay for its versatility as a grape and being grown in a variety of different temperature zones, but I think those people are really just scared of calling out the big wineries on their BS. It's true that the Chardonnays that are made in the Central Valley and in the warmer places of the state are drinkable, and given that that is a kind of food wine sort of price point most of the time, it's really not a bad thing. But as my pastor used to say, even a good thing can be a bad thing if it keeps you from the best thing. And now he was talking about Jesus, but in this case, it also applies. This Chardonnay isn't necessarily bad, but our dependence on Chardonnay and our unwillingness to introduce a grape that's not Chardonnay to the consumer only keeps us from planting and developing those varieties that really are going to do really well in a lot of our different climatic conditions. And until we do that, we're just going to do a really bad job of knocking off Burgundy, and we're going to keep doing that for the immediate future. That's part one of this particular topic. I'm trying to keep these segments pretty short, so in part two, we are going to go into some of the things that we should be doing. I'm not the kind of person who likes to bring up a problem and just whine about it. Instead, I want to offer some solutions and some suggestions as to really what we should be doing, what the customer can start asking for. There are alternatives out there which you should be trying and supporting in the marketplace. So part two will kind of get into some of the solutions and the way out of this monocultural sea of Chardonnay that we currently have. This chart, this chart, this.